Okay, I think that we will go ahead and get started. Welcome to our workshop today, Information Literacy, Foundational Concepts and Teaching Strategies. I'm super excited. This is the first workshop of my new workshop series. So it's great to have everyone here today as we talk more about information literacy and teaching strategies. Before we jump in, wanted to just get started by asking how everyone is doing today. So I've got some options up on the screen, everything from annoyed antelope to frantic ferret. So if you feel comfortable in the chat, just posting how you are today, please feel free to go ahead and do that. If the options that I have given you don't match how you're feeling, you can feel free to add your own in there as well. We are certainly open to that. So we'll give everyone a chance to respond. One of these animals, by the way, is my own personal pet, and I'll leave it up to you to determine which one that might be. So we see lots of responses coming in there. Let's see. Determined dog, busy bear, curious cat, frantic ferret, busy bear, determined dog, busy bear, love those options. Determined dog, friendly puppy, busy bear. Sassy squirrel, that is a great additional option. Thank you for that one, Erica. Jason said determined dog, although maybe one with less fur. Yeah, I'm getting a little hot out there to be really furry all the time. Excited easel, it's my cat. Yes, it is definitely my cat. He'll probably show up in the workshop today. For folks that have been to one of my workshops before, he's a frequent visitor in workshops. Wonderful. Thank you all so much for sharing how you're doing today. I hope everyone is having a good day today and hope that you all will enjoy the workshop today. So we'll go ahead and move forward. So I also like to do some sort of just quick, fun little trivia activity. As we're moving into summer, I thought summer movie trivia. And then I realized that I hardly ever watch movies anymore, and I couldn't think of summer movies past the 1990s. So none of these options are actually past the 1990s. Sorry for folks that are younger. But hopefully everyone should be able to get one or two of the options. So we have some characters that featured in prominent summer movies here. You can just post your response in the chat if you know what movie these characters belong to. So the first is A, Baby Houseman, Johnny Castle, and Neil Kellerman. B is Freddie Shoup, Chainsaw Grimp, and Vice Principal Gills. C, Richard Parker, Larry Wilson, and Bernie Lomax. D, Clark, Ellen, Rusty, and Audrey Griswold. And E, Captain Stephen Hiller, President Thomas J. Whitmore, and Russell Case. So if you know which movies any of those characters belong to, please go ahead and put your responses in the chat. See some responses that are coming in. Let's see here. So we have Dirty Dancing. Yes, correct, Erica. A is Dirty Dancing. D is National Lampoon Summer Vacation. So see, lots of folks got that one. Absolutely. A is Dirty Dancing. B. Kate got B as Summer School. I'm glad that you got that one, Kate. I was wondering if anyone would get that movie. It's one of my favorite movies, but I don't know how much people know about that one anymore. C is Weekend at Bernie's. Yes, you are correct, Missy. C is Weekend at Bernie's. Let's see. E is not Caddyshack, Jason, although that is a good guess. So it looks like most of our responses have come in, and yes, Missy got it. So E is Independence Day. So wonderful. Thank you all so much for those responses. I think that we did get all of the movies between us all. And again, I apologize for my completely outdated references. I will try to watch more recent movies. So, all right, we'll go ahead then and just briefly introduce myself for anyone who doesn't know me. My name is Jane Hammonds. I'm an assistant professor in the university libraries. My title is Teaching and Learning Engagement Librarian. And my email is hammonds.73@osu.edu. Please feel free to send me an email after the workshop if you have any questions or comments. I'm always excited to talk more about this. I wanted to share in the chat, in case you missed these, I have tons of links in the chat. So these links are all going to be for workshop materials as well as different activities that we're going to do today. So I try to put it all in one place so everyone should be able to access anything. And then you don't need to worry about writing down links throughout the workshop. I will send everyone an email afterwards that has all of this information as well as links to all the resources, activities, everything that we talk about today. So what we're going to be doing here today is we're going to be taking a big picture, thinking about what information literacy actually is, what are some of the core information literacy concepts, habits, skills that we hope our students want to develop. We're going to look a little bit about where information literacy stands within the new general education curriculum. And I know not everyone here might be associated with Ohio State, so if you're not with Ohio State, during that part, feel free to let your attention wander. As we talk specifically about the Ohio State general education curriculum. And then we'll all come back together to try to think about some strategies and activities for teaching information literacy, as well as sharing some resources that I hope will be helpful to everyone. So as I mentioned, this is the first workshop in a series of planned workshops. So as we talk about the GE learning outcomes coming up, you'll notice that there are specific workshops planned down the line that focus more specifically on those concepts. So today is really just a big picture, some sample assignments that I think will work in a variety of different types of courses. But if you are interested in teaching in a specific course or with one of the specific learning outcomes, there will be more workshops coming down the line for those. I did want to mention that for anyone that is affiliated with Ohio State, this workshop does count as credit toward completion of the Teaching Information Literacy endorsement. This is a new option this year to be able to count workshop participation toward this endorsement. So you will need to complete 12 hours of programming around information literacy if you want to earn the endorsement using the workshops. And I've put in the chat in the list of links that I gave you all there. Sorry about that. There is a link to a workshop reflection form, as well as a form which you can use to track your participation. So if you are interested in earning that endorsement, you can use that workshop reflection to write down notes that you had on the workshop today. It's not required to submit that, but it's recommended that you do complete that reflection. And then information on tracking your workshop participation. And again, if you have any questions about that, please email me afterwards and we can talk more about how the endorsement works. All right. So what is information literacy? Something just popped up in the chat. Let me see. Yes, absolutely. That's a good point. Including information literacy has in core classes is greater than just limiting to gen ed courses. Yeah. Okay, so let's jump in here and talk a little bit about what information literacy actually is. To get us started with this part, I wanted us to do some collaborative definition building. So we have a question here, how would you define information literacy? And we're going to do this on a Jamboard. So the link to the Jamboard is in those links that I shared in the chat. It's the IL Foundation's Jam link. And you can click on that and that should take you out to a Jamboard. And I'll go out there in a second and we'll, for folks that haven't used one of these before. So if you have any trouble accessing that, just let me know. I'm gonna stop sharing for a minute. I'm gonna go out to the Jamboard. Sorry. So hopefully folks should now be out and be seeing the screen with the Jamboard on there. If you're not seeing that, please let me know. If you haven't used the Jamboard before, I think the easiest way to post your response is to go over here on the left-hand side. You'll see the option to add a sticky note. You can click on that, you can type your response in there and add your response. So if you have any trouble accessing that, just post that in the chat. And we'll give everyone a chance to respond to the question of how you would define information literacy. All right, so I've posted the links to all of the materials there. So if you missed that Jamboard link, it should be the third link down there, the IL Foundations Jam. And I did just want to note that I did get a message that there is some concern that someone may be attempting to advertise a product during the workshop. If that is the case, please don't do that during the workshop. And if you did get a message and you're not sure if it was from me, just please go ahead and let me know. So we've got some responses coming in. We'll give everyone just a few more seconds if anyone wants to respond to how you would define information literacy. So I'm seeing some comments in the notes that folks got a message from someone about taking notes with a service. So again, that was not from me. I do think that someone is trying to advertise. So again, that is you, please. This is not the appropriate time to do that. And if you did get that message, please ignore that one. All right, so let's take a look at some of the responses that have come in. So how we would define information literacy. We see some responses here, knowing how to evaluate information that you receive, finding, evaluating, and using information regardless of the format of the information, ability to identify and evaluate relevant sources, being able to determine where sources came from and if they're reputable, being able to distinguish between types of sources and evaluate and interpret the information. The best ways to know fact from fiction, learning how to evaluate and locate information in various formats. Fundamental need to thrive in today's information-dependent society, locating, evaluating, and using relevant information. Right, so I think you can kind of see as you see these definitions coming together, a lot of similarities across those definitions about locating or finding information. There's a lot of emphasis on being able to evaluate information, being able to determine whether information is, relevant, whether it's appropriate, identifying fact from fiction. So that evaluation is one of those key components there that we see in that definition. So thank you all for sharing those definitions. I think that's a great way to get us started in thinking about what information literacy actually is. So we're going to go ahead and stop sharing. We'll go back to our presentation here. Second. Apologies. I feel I used to be much quicker about being able to switch back and forth between things. I don't know why. I seem to have so much trouble these days. So thank you all for the collaborative definition building. This is the definition of information literacy that is provided by the Association of College and Research Libraries in a document called the Framework for Information Literacy for Higher Education. And what this definition tries to emphasize the information literacy as a set of integrated abilities. So it's not one particular ability, but it's a set of different integrated abilities, and includes this reflective discovery of information, an understanding of how information is produced and valued, and the use of information in creating new knowledge and participating ethically in communities of learning. So this definition of information literacy is different from some of the definitions that you might be familiar with, in that it really tries to emphasize that information literacy is not just about skills. Skills are definitely part of information literacy, but it is a sort of a bigger picture kind of definition of information literacy. And it also tries to emphasize that students in this picture, they're not just information consumers, but they are also information creators. So what we try to highlight with this understanding of information literacy, again, that it incorporates those skills, those abilities that we see, but it also includes habits or dispositions or ways of thinking. And so, it's not just that you need to know how to search a database, but you need to be motivated to actually do that search, and to have patience and persistence to review the different types of results that you're getting, to select the results that might be most appropriate. And then it also emphasizes that you need to have these conceptual understandings. So understandings about how information is created, how it's accessed, how it's shared, how it's valued, about the legal and ethical guidelines that surround information. And so it really tries to give this broader, sort of more expanded definition of information literacy that takes it beyond just focusing on those specific skills. So I do want to highlight some different aspects of information literacy. These are just some of the key skills and dispositions. These are, by no means is this a definitive list of everything that would make someone information literate, but learners would need to be able to identify what authoritative sources are, but they would also have to motivate themselves to take that time, to make that effort to actually find authoritative sources. They need to be able to distinguish between different types of information formats, need to be able to give credit and know why you should give credit to others through proper attribution, develop research questions, think about how the specific information need matches with a specific information tool, and be able to select, for this information need, I probably should search over here, but for this, it's okay if I search over here. So to match those information needs with the appropriate kinds of search tools, right? So to be able to do all of that, there's a lot of things that students need to understand about information and about research and scholarship. So what the framework tries to do is really highlight 6 core conceptual understandings that they think are really important to learners to be able to effectively engage with information. So one of these is this idea that authority is constructed and contextual. So this considers the idea that when you think about information, information sources have various types of authority. So students need to understand what are the factors that would make a source authoritative or appropriate or relevant in this situation. And they would need to understand how context impacts authority. So to recognize that different fields or disciplines or professions or communities might have different standards for what is considered an appropriate source or an authoritative source. And so to understand how context is intertwined with authority of information sources. The second key concept is information creation as a process. And this really highlights this idea that students have to understand the different processes by which information sources are created. Recognize that information comes in a variety of different formats, and that the creation process and the format contributes to the authority of the source or the appropriateness of the source, or how you might want to use different sources. And this can be really challenging, especially with students. We talk about what we call container collapse, which is basically this idea that we access everything online now. And so everything looks like a website. And so the sort of standards that we had to distinguish different types of sources in the past aren't really as clear anymore. And so it can be really challenging for students to tell the difference between different types of sources. The third key concept is information has value. So for this, students need to understand all of these sort of ways that information can have value, that it can be personal value, it can be social value, financial value. And they need to understand that because of all of these different ways that information has value, there are lots of legal and ethical guidelines and restrictions around how information can be used that they may or may not want to follow. So those are 3 of the key conceptual understandings. The other 3, research is inquiry. So we think it's important for learners to understand research as this collaborative, sort of iterative and open-ended process, rather than this viewpoint of research as it's about finding the one correct answer. But instead we recognize that research is this ongoing process in which answers are going to lead to new questions. Scholarship is conversation. And you can expand this to think about, conversations within professions or within disciplines or, different communities, that there are these ongoing conversations in which new ideas are being debated and discussed. And students have to recognize that anytime they are using an information source, a scholarly article, for example, that's the one voice in that ongoing conversation that's been taking place. So they have to be able to situate that source within that conversation. And then the last one is searching as strategic exploration. So this really highlights this idea that there's so many different search tools that are available out there. They have different characteristics and capabilities and limitations. And so recognizing, what is the search tool or resource that is going to get me to the information that I need. So those are the 6 core concepts. I do have descriptions, all of those on the participant handout. So if you missed that one there, I'll put those links in the chat again. On that participant handout, there are descriptions of each of those concepts, as well as links to find more information about those concepts. Right, so we'll take a pause here and say, just give everyone a chance to reflect on what we've been talking about so far and think about how this definition might compare to your previous understandings of information literacy. And if you feel comfortable sharing in the chat any thoughts that you have about the way that I've been describing information literacy, you can please feel free to go and put those in the chat. So we'll take a pause here, reflect, check the chat. So Crystal shared, it's more detailed and eloquent, but aligned, wonderful. Missy shared, these objectives are just awesome. They're so clear and comprehensive, wonderful. Nikki shared, this is much deeper, more comprehensive than my previous understanding. Yes, I think that was one of the goals of the framework, was to, previous definitions had been very mechanical, very straightforward, skill-based. Information literacy was basically the same, no matter what discipline you were in, no matter what context you were in. And so this really tries to expand that definition to really see how contextual information literacy is, how conceptual it is, that you can't, having the skills doesn't really matter if you don't have the disposition or if you don't have those broader understandings, that allow you to transfer what you've learned into other situations. So Amy shared, I disagree with the fleshing out of authority, but understand where it's coming from. And I would love to hear more about disagreements that you have with that, Amy. Please feel free to share those if you're comfortable. We can talk about those. And I can mention here that when the framework for information literacy came out, it was not automatically well received among all librarians or everyone that looked at it. So I found it really valuable in thinking about my own understanding of information literacy, but there have definitely been challenges that have been raised about different aspects of the framework. So if you have concerns about different aspects, please feel free to share those as well. Okay, so thank you all for your comments so far. And we'll jump in here a little bit more. So when we think about information literacy, sort of the challenges that might experience or the learning bottlenecks that they might experience, if we think about bottlenecks as places where students might get stuck or where they might struggle, I tried to highlight here a few of the very big picture bottlenecks that we tend to see with students when it comes to information literacy, and kind of connect those to some of those core concepts. So one of the big things that we see is really just understanding expectations for research assignments. Students might have one view of what we're talking about when we say research assignments or information assignments more broadly. So any type of assignment doesn't have to be a traditional research paper, but types of assignments where we're requiring students to use information to accomplish some purpose. Students may have an understanding of what that is, but that can be very different from the instructor understanding. For a research per paper example, student might think the goal of this is for me to summarize the existing knowledge on the topic. Whereas you as the instructor might think, no, I want you to add to that conversation. I want you to give your own interpretation, your own analysis. And so that can be a different way of thinking about how to approach a paper that students might not be familiar with. Search tools and search strategies, lots of different areas in this that cause issues for students. There's so many different search tools and search resources and ways to go about searching. Some of the research out there has found that students tend to stick with a very limited number of search tools, and they use those no matter what the context is. So if I learned how to use JSTOR when I was in high school, that is the database that I'm going to use no matter what class I'm in, even if it's not the best one for my information need. Evaluating information sources, so many challenges in this area. And I think that we've seen a lot of the consequences of the challenges in this area and things that are going on in our society today. And then using and citing sources ethically, lots of challenges there as well in terms of understanding why citations are important, understanding how to effectively integrate sources. So these are very big picture, some of the different learning bottlenecks that I see related to information literacy. So I wanted to give you all a chance to share some of your thoughts. What have you experienced with the students that you've been working in whatever capacity you work with students, as a librarian, as an instructor, other capacities that you might be working with students? What do you see as some of the greatest bottlenecks that students experience related to information literacy, or challenges that they might experience? So that one again will be in those links, list of links. That is the Menti link there. Let me see, Mentimeter poll. So if you click on that one, that will take you out to the poll. You'll have a chance to share your responses there. And I'm gonna again stop and go out to that poll. All right, so we'll give everyone a chance to add any responses that they have, and we'll see the responses as they pop up here. Some of the responses that we're getting: searching, citations, afraid to ask for help. That's a great one. And that's one that I think a lot of people don't think about, but I think part of becoming an information literate person is recognizing when you need to ask for help. Absolutely. So we see more responses that are coming in. Settling for one source. Yes, I think that really gets to that issue of dispositions or motivations. This idea that a learner might settle for the first source or the easiest source that they find. See, paraphrasing and searching are getting some definite responses there. Facts versus values, published versus true, those are great. See, overwhelmed has got a few different responses, or flood of information. Yeah. So we'll give it just 10 more seconds to let folks respond. Knowing what is credible, confusion, exhaustion. I really love that some of these responses are getting to this idea that it's really about affective. It's not, that students might not have the skills. It's about how tired everyone is and how overwhelmed everyone is. And so I think that really highlights this idea that information literacy is really contextual. And it's very complex, and it's influenced by all of these factors that are not just about knowledge, but also about our dispositions, our feelings. Those all contribute to our how we might go about searching for information and how we respond to the information that we receive. So thank you all for sharing all of your responses there. Settling for one. Yep, knowing what is credible. Quoting, paraphrasing, exhaustion, great. So we'll go ahead and we'll stop sharing for a second. We'll go back out to the presentation. All right. Okay. So what I wanted to try to do with this section was to really just highlight sort of the complexity of information literacy as a topic, get us thinking about some of the challenges that students might be experiencing related to information literacy. So that as we move forward, we can start to break down things and think about what do I actually need to teach when I am trying to teach students to develop their information literacy. So we'll allow for any questions or comments here. I'll check the chat. Yeah, Missy said a lot of it is fear. Yes, absolutely. So please feel free to go ahead and add any questions or comments that you had in. And we'll go ahead and just do a really quick overview of where information literacy stands within the new general education curriculum. So I'm going to do a quick poll just to see folks' familiarity with information literacy in the GE. So we'll go ahead and launch that poll. This poll just has 2 questions. So are you familiar with the information literacy learning outcomes in the new general education program? And are you teaching or developing a course incorporating information literacy learning outcomes? And again, for any folks that may not be from Ohio State, please feel free to ignore this poll, and we'll get back to the big picture stuff in just a second. All right, so we'll give it 10 more seconds, and then we'll share those responses. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, and we'll share the results for everyone. So hopefully folks are actually seeing the results here. It looks like in terms of, are you familiar with the IL learning outcomes in the general education curriculum? Looks like most people don't really know, or they're not really sure, but we do have a few people that are familiar with those, about 30%. Then in terms of, are you teaching or developing a course including IL learning outcomes? So we got a mix there. A few people are definitely, some are not sure, some think they probably will be in the future. Great. So thank you all again for sharing your responses there. And we're going to close that poll for now. So this is the structure of the new GE. And you'll see one place right away where information literacy is, and that is obviously in the foundations. There is, students will have to take at least 3 credit hours, either writing an information literacy course. But if you look at the program as a whole, there are actually many places where you can see information literacy learning outcomes across the program. So the big picture program expected learning outcomes, the first 2 are information literacy related specifically. So students have to be able to locate and select information sources that are credible, relevant, and appropriate to the context, and have to demonstrate critical and logical thinking by analyzing and integrating information from multiple sources and disciplines. So those are the big picture program learning outcomes. And then within the writing information literacy foundations area, there are 3 specific information literacy learning outcomes related to accessing, sharing, using, creating information, using context appropriate search strategies, excuse me, and evaluating and selecting critical, credible and relevant information sources. And then you also see information literacy in other places show up. So in other foundational courses, such as in the natural sciences and social sciences, they also have information literacy learning outcomes related to evaluating and responsibly using information from the natural sciences or from the social sciences. So information literacy learning outcomes are actually spread throughout various areas in the GE curriculum. And although these outcomes don't always use exactly the same language that you see from the framework for information literacy, these outcomes were definitely influenced by that description of information literacy that we just talked about. And I know this because I was on the committee that developed these learning outcomes. And so that was sort of the background in terms of thinking about how to develop these outcomes, trying to keep that perspective, that broad, enhanced understanding of information literacy in mind as we developed these outcomes. So I wanted to take a minute and just kind of think about, as we look at these outcomes, trying to start breaking them down into thinking about what it actually means when we have one of these outcomes and what you might actually want to think about teaching if one of these was one of your outcomes. So thinking about something like demonstrating critical and logical thinking by analyzing and integrating information from multiple information sources and disciplines. There's a lot that actually goes into be able to doing that effectively, right? So students would have to have an understanding of, the ways that sources are integrated, disciplinary differences or professional differences in how sources are integrated. They have to have an understanding of the characteristics of many different types of information sources. They have to know how those sources are combined, to have that understanding of scholarship as conversation or research as inquiry. So these are some of the kind of core conceptual understandings and skills and things that students would really need to be able to meet this learning outcome. So I think that it's helpful as we think about teaching these outcomes in our course to take that time to try to break them down a little bit and think about what actually goes into this. What would students really have to understand to be able to do this? What would they really need to be able to do in order to meet these outcomes? And I think it can be really helpful to think back to those core concepts and those skills to start identifying some of the key aspects of each of these learning outcomes. The first learning outcome in the G program, as I mentioned, was locate and select information sources that are credible, relevant, and appropriate to context. And I was going to have us go out to a Jamboard and do this activity, but in the interest of time, rather than trying to go out to that Jamboard again, if you feel comfortable sharing in the chat, thinking about this outcome of locate and select information sources that are credible, relevant, and appropriate to the context. Identify one or two things that you think students really would need to understand or would need to know how to do to be able to meet that outcome. And if you want to think about the core concepts that we talked about, which of the core concepts do you see that are really relevant to this learning outcome? So I'll give everyone a chance to think about this. And if you feel comfortable sharing a response in the chat, please go ahead and do that. If not, that's okay as well. And I'll check what we have in the chat right now while folks are thinking. So Kate said there's no right or wrong, whether good, better, best. So Amy shared persistence. Yes, that is definitely one of the key dispositions that students would need in order to be able to locate and select information sources that are credible, relevant, and appropriate to the context. Yes, absolutely. So we'll give folks a few more seconds if they want to share any other ideas about what you think students really need to understand or be able to do, or what dispositions you think that they might need in order to really be able to meet this learning outcome. So Brian shared authority is constructed and contextual. Yes, definitely. They would need to understand what are the factors that make a source authoritative or appropriate, and what contributes to that, what makes an author authoritative, what makes a specific type of source more authoritative than others. Absolutely. Carolyn shared what kinds of evidence counts in different situations. Yes, right. So that recognition that a source that is considered perfectly appropriate or a type of evidence that's considered appropriate in one situation may not work in another situation. And so to recognize that context. Michi shared information has value, the value that information has in various contexts. Yes, but right along those same lines, thinking about, that it's credible, relevant, and appropriate to the context, not just, it's appropriate, but within this context, what is going to work, what is going to be convincing evidence, what is going to be a relevant source. Focus information has value, searching as strategic exploration. Yes, absolutely. I think all of those are definitely relevant. So I just tried to highlight a few here of the ones that I see that are relevant. And as we already mentioned, we think authority is constructed as contextual is definitely up there. Searching as strategic exploration. So when we think about this outcome, on the surface, it might look pretty straightforward, that students need to be able to locate and select information sources that are credible, relevant, and appropriate to the context. But if we actually think about it, there is so much that goes into being able to do this. And this can be really helpful if you are teaching a course or thinking about teaching a course that has this outcome in it, or other IL-related learning outcomes, to try to take that time to break those outcomes down a little bit and think about what actually goes into allowing students to be able to meet this outcome. So we'll pause here again to see if there are any questions or comments. And then for the last part, we'll move into talking about some activities and strategies that we might have, big picture for thinking about teaching information literacy. So Michi said that means it's important for students to be exposed to various contexts and for instructors to be familiar with different contexts too. Yes, and our workshop next week is focused specifically on searching context. What are the different contexts that students might be searching for information for? So if you're interested in learning more about that, I highly recommend setting up for the workshop next week. So I did just want to briefly address a few kind of questions that might pop up in terms of, one, should my students already know all of this? How can I have time to teach this, and what resources are available? Should my students already know all of this? Of course, one of the reasons that we are putting the GE foundations in place is that to create the situation where students will have at least a foundation of knowledge in these areas that they can apply to other as they move through their programs. But the reality is going to be that students are kind of coming into your classes with many different backgrounds and a lot of different experiences related to their familiarity with research, with search tools, with citation practices, with scholarship in general. They're going to come in with many, many different types of backgrounds, and some students are going to know more than others. So we can't assume that students, even in upper level classes, are going to come in already knowing how to do all of these things. How can I have time to teach all of this? I do want to emphasize that it's not expected that any one session or assignment or even one course is going to ensure that students have completely developed their information literacy. Even after they complete the writing and information literacy course, that's going to give them a foundation. But as we've talked about, information literacy is contextual, so that as they move into courses in their disciplines, they're going to continue to need to learn and expand their information literacy knowledge and skills and dispositions. And then what resources are available to help me? That's what we're going to be talking about in the next section. All right, so teaching strategies and activities. Right. Okay, so we're going to do a really quick activity here. So we have 3 disciplines or fields: A, nursing; B, history; C, literature; and then 3 types of citation styles: MLA, APA, and Chicago style. If you're comfortable in the chat, just post, which citation style you think goes with which discipline. So I think A is this, I think B is this, I think C is this. We'll just give everyone a few minutes if you feel comfortable in the chat. Which citation style matches which discipline? Right, C is MLA, B is Chicago, A is, I think, APA, history Chicago, A is APA. So we have the responses there. It took us, a few seconds to get those responses. Yeah, Amanda, A, APA, B, Chicago, C, MLA, right? And I think many of us probably, even if these aren't our disciplines, we probably at least had some idea of which citation style went with which discipline, even if we're not completely familiar with all of the ins and outs of that citation style. We probably had at least a little bit of an idea that in literature classes, they're probably going to be using the MLA citation style. And how do we know what citation styles go with which disciplines? Now that's something that we have developed over time through our experience as students, as graduate students, as professionals in higher education, whether we're librarians or instructors or working with students in some other way. As we've had that experience, we've developed this understanding of this idea that specific disciplines have different types of citation styles. So even if we don't know exactly which citation style goes with each discipline, we probably at least have that core understanding to recognize that there are different citation styles and different disciplines are going to use different ones. Right? So we know that because of our experience, our background, in our disciplines and in higher education. So if we think about strategies that we can use to start teaching information literacy, the first big picture strategy I would like to recommend is just based on the Decoding the Disciplines model developed by Joan Middendorf and David Pace, to have us really think about the ways our disciplinary perspective, or if we want to think more big picture, our experience in higher education, our experience as academics, how that influences the expectations and assumptions that we are making about the knowledge that our students have. So any type of assignment where we are expecting students to use information, whether it's a traditional research paper or not, thinking about questions like, how would I do this? And how did I know how to do this? What am I drawing on? What background am I drawing on? My disciplinary expertise, my general academic experience, and do students have that same experience? Do they have that same expertise? So thinking about how this background that we have might be influencing the expectations that we have for students, how they would know how to do it. And as we start to break things down, that can give us an idea of here's a place where students might need a little bit more guidance. Here's where they might need more resources. So if we take the time to do this with our assignments, it can really start to get to those places that we want to teach, or those resources that we want to provide to students. So that's my first big picture strategy. The second one is what we've actually already been doing. As we think about those expected learning outcomes related to information literacy, taking that time to break those down and think about, what does this really involve? What would students really need to understand? What would they need to be able to do? What dispositions do they need to do this? And using that framework, using the core concepts as a way to guide and thinking about identifying some of the places where students might need a little bit more support or guidance. The third big strategy I wanted to highlight is just being transparent. So this is based on the Transparency in Learning and Teaching framework developed by Marianne Wieglemus. And this really emphasizes letting students know why they are completing an assignment, what they should do, what they should not do, and how their work will be evaluated. So, rather than, just telling students, go out and find sources on this, give them just a little bit more guidance. Start here, or, this is the type of source that you need, and define what that is. Don't assume that they know what a scholarly article is, or what an empirical article is, different terms that we use to kind of describe the same thing. So just giving that little bit more of transparency of what you are looking for there. So those are three big strategies that I wanted to emphasize. We'll take one more quick pause here just to see if, in terms of the strategies, in case anyone has any questions or comments. And then we're going to go through really quickly some sample activities and resources that are available as we move through the last few minutes of the workshop. So one thing that you might wonder is, how do I know what my students know or don't know? So I wanted to highlight here a few assignments that you can do to get a picture of the existing knowledge that your students have related to information literacy before they come into the course. I was going to have us all do this together, but unfortunately, in the interest of time, I don't know if we have time to do this. But basically what this is an assignment. If you do go out to this link, what you'll see, it takes you out to just an assignment description. And this is an activity that you can do with your students where you give them the assignment description, whether it's a research assignment or just any type of assignment where they're using information, and have them highlight and annotate and, kind of mark up that assignment description. Here's a term that I don't understand. I'm not really sure what you mean by this. They can do it as individually, they can do it as a group. It can be just a 10 or 15-minute activity where you have students go through that assignment kind of step by step and give you feedback so that you have an idea of what they're not sure about, anything where they think that they might need more guidance, or where, your expectations just aren't matching each other. So this is something that you can do with any type of assignment that you have, and it can be very techie where they could do annotations and highlights, but it could just be something that they do in paper, pen and pencil with a small group sitting next to each other. They annotate, they review that assignment, and they give you feedback at that moment about what they understand or don't understand, so that you can identify when you want to provide more feedback to them. So there's one quick example of the type of activity that you could do to kind of gauge students' prior knowledge coming in. Very simple activities that I have done many times and that I always find helpful, and I always feel bad because this is such a simple thing in one way, but I found it to be very valuable. It's just true false activities. I would divide students into groups. I give them, 5 or 6 statements related to whatever it is that I want them to do. If it's like, do a literature review, analyze a scholarly article, whatever it is that I want them to do, I give them some statements related to that, some true and false statements, and have them identify what is true, what is false, and explain to me why. And it works so well. I would do a statement like, for example, the purpose of research. The purpose of a research paper is for you to summarize existing knowledge on a topic. Is that true or false? And they might say true, they might say false, they might say, well, sort of. And if they say, well, sort of, that's great. That gives me an opportunity to talk about the differing expectations that an instructor might have for research. Yes, I do want you to summarize the existing knowledge on the topic, but I want you to go beyond that. I want you to provide your own interpretation or analysis. So you shouldn't consider summarizing to be the end goal of your paper. And so it's always generated really good discussion whenever I've done this in different types of activities. And I always include a few statements that are kind of a little bit in between, so that it does open up those areas for discussion and to clarify any misunderstandings that students might have. Self-explaining activities. There are many ways that you can do this. But if you have a task where students have to use information in some way, whether it's a research paper or just an assignment that they have to do, just have them tell you in advance how they would go about doing that. And it could be, they could work in small groups to tell you how they would do it, talk amongst themselves, tell me how you would do it, so that you don't have to listen to every student in the class. They can do it written, verbally, lots of ways that you could do this. But just beforehand, just let them tell you what they would do. One way that we do this in one of the classes that we teach is the very beginning of the class. It's a credit-bearing class on information literacy, and we give students a task, and we say, create a short screencast of yourself. I think it's like 90 seconds long. Create a short screencast of yourself, how you would go about searching for information and why you would consider the source that you found appropriate. And they'll do things like, oh, well, I found this source here, and in my screencast, I highlighted that it's a .org, and so that means it must be a good source. And that right away gives me a chance to say, hey, just because it's a .org, I don't think that necessarily means that you need to think that it's a good source. So it kind of lets me right away get to some of the misconceptions that they might have. So lots of ways you can do this. I've given a few sample links on the handout of different versions of this activity that you could do. So thinking specifically about some of those learning outcomes, locating credible, relevant sources. So that's 1.1 outcome that we have. This is something where you can do an activity like comparing search tools. As I mentioned, students tend to use the same one search tool that they learned how to use. Assign each group a different search tool to use and have them talk about how their results differ based on the different search tool. Well, I got 10,000 responses here, but I only got 20 articles when I used this database. Well, why is that? Because each of these databases have different functions and different, ways that they are intended to be used. So lots of things ways that you could do this assignment. Selecting credible sources. As we mentioned, evaluating sources is a real challenge for everyone. I highly recommend that you think about teaching students the lateral reading strategy. This is a strategy where instead of doing a deep analysis of the site that they are using, students look across different sources to find information about the site that they want to use. So they Google the source, they look on Wikipedia about it. They get other feedback about that source rather than just relying on what the source tells you about itself. So I've got a lot of links here on this lateral reading strategy, and we'll talk more about this too in one of the workshops that follows. But this is just a quick example to show. If you look at this website itself, it's on plant-based ingredient guide. it looks pretty good when you first look at it. But as you do a lateral reading and go over to Wikipedia, you find out that it was sponsored by a lobbying organization that represents restaurant and food companies. So that kind of gives you that bigger picture of where that source came from. Integrating sources from multiple disciplines. So students can do something like, again, just annotating or highlighting an article that highlights the different ways that people in their discipline or their field integrate sources into a specific work. Right. You can have students look at, an article on the same topic from 3 different fields and compare the different perspectives that they might get based on which field that article comes from. So there's lots of different ways that you can kind of address some of these learning outcomes without having to do huge, massive changes to all of your courses. When students are giving presentations, make sure you provide them with links to places where they can go to find free, openly licensed materials and images that they can use. I put some of these on the handout as well. Have students actually identify a Creative Commons license for a presentation that they are giving, so they think about themselves as an information creator with rights about how their information is going to be used. So I know that we are down to the last couple minutes of the presentation. We've got some comments in the chat here. I just want to highlight the last few pages. I just got links to a lot of different resources where you can go to find information. So instructor resources at university libraries. This is a site where we have all kinds of different videos, sample activities, readings related to information literacy. We have all of these categories of resources. So search tools, research questions, information sources. For each one of these, you can find sample readings, videos, and activities. So I recommend you go ahead and take a look at that site if you're looking for resources. Information literacy concepts page on the Teaching and Learning Resource Center. And just a few additional guides there. So we'll pause there, we'll stop. We have like 2 minutes left. We'll take a look at the chat and see what questions and comments that folks might have. Please feel free to share any takeaways, next steps that you have. And we do, again, have additional workshops coming up, and I'll share links to all of those in the follow-up email with everyone. All right, so I will pause here. We're going to go out and go to the chat and see comments that are coming in. So thank you, everyone. Great ideas. So any shared true false, I've always done this and always surprised by student responses. Love the idea of screencast. Do my students have the tech to complete it? Generally, it's pretty easy because there are lots of free resources out there that you can do screencasts. Great idea. So I'm sorry that we didn't have a chance to really get into all of the assignments, but again, if you come to any of the additional workshops, we'll go more into depth into some of those. And you can also contact me. I've got a trove of sample assignments in all different areas that I am happy to share at any time with folks.